Welcome. How's everyone doing? You had a good day? Who's been to a talk about AI already today? Who's feeling inspired and energized by all the talk of AI, and who is more in the we're all gonna die kind of camp? I think there was definitely more lights going on in the we're gonna die. Yeah. So this is. I've had a year. Things have changed a lot, and a year ago I was like, I like writing code. I like writing it line by line and typing the curly braces and the semicolons, and I don't want to let that go. And now I'm just kind of switch to that tab, see how that one's doing. Oh, this one's asking for input, and so on. And I'm trying to sort of tone it down and not be too zealoty about it, but we'll see how I do. The QR code it's actually for tomorrow's talk that I wanted it. I do this Reasons to be Cheerful talk, and I used NGL, the thing that Instagrammers use to get people to ask them questions or whatever. And it kind of worked. I was getting people sending me their reasons to be cheerful. And it sort of worked, but it sort of didn't. And so I wanted a version that worked exactly the way I wanted it. And so yesterday I asked Claude, and it wrote it, and it's there, and you can scan that QR code, and it will take you to my new website. And you can leave me messages about this talk, and if we have time at the end, I might get to them. So if you're one of those people who would always like to ask a question in a talk, but is never sort of brave enough to put your hand up, because apparently that's a thing, then this is your chance. Ask questions, or just tell me to do them. Right, fundamentals. Let's start with one disclaimer. So I'm talking about Claude because I use Claude, because in my experience, Claude works better than the other options. And so far, Anthropic have not pulled the rug and gone, haha, your $200 a month is now not going to get you anywhere near as much compute. But what I'm going to be talking about could be applied to Codex or Gemini, or indeed download a model onto your local machine and run it locally. As long as it's like the 35 billion parameter Qwen 3.6, you can probably get reasonable results. But talking about Claude specifically, initially we have to talk about the models. Claude has 3 models and 1 made-up one. So you have Haiku, which is dumb as a sack of spanners. You have Sonnet, which is the kind of day-to-day, this can actually do the things that you want it to do. And then you have Opus, which is the really, really clever overthinking model. And we're currently on Opus 4.8, and it is disturbing how like a person it is. And then there's Mythos, which is made up. We have Claude.md. This became standardized across all the other things as agents.md, but Anthropic, if you call it agents.md, Claude will pick it up. The funny thing is, if you call it Claude.md, most other agents will pick that up as well. Claude.md is where you put basic instructions for your project. And this is like, it's a .NET project, this is what we're building, I like these coding standards, they're in editor config, basic rules, like the sort of stuff that you would give to onboarding a new person onto your team, but as terse as possible. Okay, if you can keep Claude.md down to a couple of hundred lines of markdown, then that's a good thing to be aiming for. We have context windows. Context windows have been getting bigger and bigger. Claude used to have 200,000 token context windows. Now Opus has a 1 million token context window, and Sonnet 4.6 can go up to 600,000. It doesn't matter. Still don't go past 200,000. You want to keep your context slim and svelte and not over full, because otherwise it starts to get confused. It keeps contradictory ideas in there, and it will blow a circuit. We have skills. These are smaller, little bits of Markdown, which have a tiny bit of text at the start that says, this is how you keep a devlog, or this is how you apply an OpenSpec thing. And skills, it keeps that little brief bit of text in the context window, so it knows the skill is there. But then anytime it wants to use it, it reads it in, it looks through it, it follows the instructions, and then it's gone again. And so it's kind of like, it knows how to do something, but it's not taking up valuable space in the context. We have commands, which are like skills, but with parameters that you can start with a slash. And so like exit is a command. You type /exit, and it closes the thing down. You can do /usage, and it shows you how much you've done. But you can create your own custom commands, and you can give it parameters. The programming language for commands is still Markdown. So yeah, there's a lot of overlap between skills and commands. And then we have agents. Obviously, the thing is an agent, but we also have sub-agents. So you can define agents, and we will talk about why you do that. So this is the problem with AI, is I could stand up here, and I could code something from scratch in 45 minutes, and it would look great, and then you would go back to your teams, to your jobs, where you actually are responsible for the code and it going into production, and you say, I am prepared to bet good time that this will continue to work into the future. And that's when you start to run into problems. That's when vibe coding just completely bombs out. Was anyone just in Dylan's talk? That thing about owning the code and understanding the code and knowing what's going on. So I'm going to talk about how we can get there. And I've bounced around various words for this. Mindful is the best word I can come up with. So I do like mindfulness meditations with Headspace and all this sort of thing. And mindfulness is about being aware of what's going on around you and what's happening in this moment, and kind of being focused on what actually matters. And if you do mindful engineering with an AI agent, it's like the opposite of vibe coding. And so we are going to talk about 5 things, 5 ideas that you can take and apply regardless of what the agent is, what the harness is, all these sorts of things. So we have a spec, and the spec is like your new version of the source code. We have separation of powers. We have the objective description definition of done, which is something that in my years and years of like consulting and working with dozens of different software teams, one of the things you run into so many times is nobody has a definition. Nobody knows what done means. There's a done column on the whiteboard or on the task board or in Jira, but nobody actually knows what it means when a ticket is put into there. This becomes even more important. We will talk about setting limits, and we're going to talk about context windows, context rot, and that sort of thing. So, start by talking about spec before code. And I use a plugin, which is available on everything. And I mean, literally, it gives you a list. Here are the things I can be configured with, and I haven't heard enough of them. But, you know, Gemini, Codex, Cursor, Anti-Gravity, it's called OpenSpec. And OpenSpec works on 4 phases when you are building. Doesn't matter if it's a silly little website so people can leave you messages, or if it is your own coding agent that you're writing in .NET because you didn't like the others. So you have an explore phase, a propose phase, an apply phase, and an archive phase. So explore is OpenSpec's kind of slightly more advanced version of the plan mode that is built into Claude. So explore is talk through this idea with me. We're not writing any code. We're not even making any technology decisions necessarily. You're just going to interview me and ask me questions about what it is that I want. And we can give additional instructions around this. We can say, if this already exists, If this is a piece of software that I can just go to the internet and download, please tell me. I would much rather do that than vibe code it or spec-driven code it with you. It would be, I just want to solve this problem. This isn't anything else. So yes, you have your explore phase. Then you have your propose phase, which is where you take like the requirements that have come out of your explore phase and you turn them into a design and a proposal and specifications and a task list that you're going to have to go through to actually implement this thing. Then you have your apply phase, and this is where you get the agent to actually write code and write tests and run the tests. And you go through a sort of code review, code review, code review cycle until it gets to the point where it's actually done. And then you have archive, which is, we've done it, it worked, we've tested it, it's ready, and now we can take that change and put that into production. And I just want to show you, put that into the history, and I just want to show you what this looks like in a project. To do. So, yes. So this is my own agent that I am writing, which I am using this flow with. And you can see here, I got my OpenSpec directory and I got my specs, and these are all the specs that have fallen out of these discussions that I've had with this agent since Friday. I may have spent more time than I meant to this weekend, kind of burning through this. I have a Claude Max subscription, the $200 a month one. It's very, very difficult to run that out. And so you just keep going and going and going. So these are the specifications that it's managed to extract out of all the changes that we have done. And you can go into here and you can see that we have an agent core spec, define how the daemon agent core executes turns, running as an isolated JSON LSTD, blah, 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 blah. And then we also have changes, and you can see that we have, no, I didn't want to do that thing that you just did. There we go. So yes, I have my change. This is the change that's currently in progress, and you can see we have our design document, and we have our proposal document, and we have our tasks document, and it's going through and it's ticking off. So we've done task groups 1 to 4. 5 is up next, but in the archive directory, there you go, that was the first one. When was the 23rd? That was when I started. So yeah, this is all the changes that we have done so far. And so all of these conversations, all of these design decisions, all of these questions that were asked and answered are in my GitHub repo. You commit this to GitHub, and so it's like having a proper history of the development of your thing. It's like you kept a developer's log, like your manager and his manager and the guy who eventually just at the top of the company signs the checks. All fucking wish you would do. It would be so much better if you would do that. And this is just doing it for me. So yes, this is OpenSpec. You can go to openspec.dev and you can download it and you can install it. It kind of guides you through this whole process. And like I say, it works with whatever you want to use. At this point, you stop worrying quite so much about the code itself, the semicolons and the sort of the details. The implementation of the methods, I would say, is something you stop worrying about quite so much. The classes, the names of the classes, the public, the contract, the sort of interface, the API and so forth, I still keep a fairly close eye on that, because a lot of the time you can tell if it's created a method, you kind of go, that doesn't make any sense in the context of this system. Why has it created a take dog outside and shoot it method when I'm making a washing machine controller? And so you want to keep vague familiarity with the thing, and obviously you want to make sure it's covered by a lot of tests. But yeah, the actual implementation of individual methods is something that I am probably starting to lose touch with a little in the tens of thousands of lines of C# that I have generated with an AI agent since Friday. So in order to try and help with that, we have this rule: no actor approves its own code. So what actually happens here is we have an orchestrator. The orchestrator is the AI agent that I am actually talking to. So in the example here, and if you want to see another way of doing this, by the way, I forgot to mention this at the top. So yeah, if you want to see a completely different approach to this same thing, go and watch the talk that I did at NDC London at the end of January, which has another approach. It's still open spec, it's still Claude, it's still talking about roughly the same things, but you can see a completely different way of applying it. Both of them work for me. It's an evolving thing. And if you come and see this again in Oslo in 2 months, I'll probably have changed it again. So anyway, we have the orchestrator. This is the thing I'm having a conversation with. The orchestrator is what I do my explore with. It's what takes care of like creating commit messages and generally handling and managing everything. And then we have a worker, and the worker is an agent definition, and it runs on the Sonnet model. So the worker just churns and churns and churns until what it's produced matches what it thinks it was asked for. Like once the autocomplete has run its course. And then once the worker reports back to the orchestrator and says, I'm done, the orchestrator goes to the reviewer. The reviewer runs on Opus. And the reviewer looks at what the worker has done and looks at the spec and looks at the design and looks at the tasks and says, do these two things match? And if they do, then it says OK. And if they don't, it reports back to the orchestrator and it'll kind of give it a list of B for blocking, W for warning, and N for nit. And these are numbered. Came up with this all by itself, by the way. And if there are nits, then the orchestrator comes to me and goes, do you want to fix these, or are you OK with them? But if there's warnings or blockers, it automatically goes back to the worker. And it goes through this, and it does this one task at a time. So let's take a look in, let's look in Daemon Core. No, let's look in the other one. This is CMux, by the way. I don't know quite what platforms this is available on. I'm on a Mac, but CMux is a terminal based on Ghost TTY, which is specifically designed for working with agents. So you have, instead of just tabs across the top, you have tab groups listed down the side, and then within each of those you have tabs that are in the same directory, but it kind of flashes them blue when the agent's asking for your input, and so you can have like 10 of these down the left-hand side, and you're just waiting there like Pavlov's dog or Skinner's rat for one of them to flash blue. So yes, let's go to here, and we'll go to open this up. Right, so this is the messaging website thing. And here we have our agent definition. So we can say worker implements one tasks.md section of an open spec change and owns the scaffolding, migrations, inbox config, blah, blah, blah. And then you've got this whole UR thing. And people sort of, they question this, they push back on it. And then you see Mark Andreessen. I don't know if anyone saw this, it was a few weeks ago. He published his prompt, and it was like intended to show what a hardcore tech bro Mark Andreessen is, the guy who presided over the downfall of Netscape, but somehow walked away with enough money to matter for the next 40 years. But yes, he published this whole problem. Don't blow smoke up my arse. Don't tell me that. Don't be afraid. Don't be woke. Don't be bothered about political correctness. And you're just kind of like, it's not, you are a senior .NET web engineer is not going to produce you particularly different results from you are a junior .NET web engineer. You are a brand new, fresh out of college .NET web engineer. This is your first job. It's all going to produce roughly the same stuff. The point here is not this kind of description thing. It's not convincing the LLM that it is a character. Although, if you are bored, you can tell it within this definition to talk like a pirate. It will quite happily do that, or talk like an English butler. And actually, if you have the worker talks like a pirate and the reviewer talks like an English butler, you can get some really good conversations going backwards and forwards. But no, so it's the stuff that you want is .NET, Web, ASP.NET Core 10, Razor Pages. It's these specific technology things because this is autocomplete. And so putting the names of the technologies in there, the patterns that you want to use, the frameworks that you want to use, the processes that you want to use, is like typing a good number of the letters in the method name that you want so that it filters down the list of possible responses, and it's more likely that you're going to find the one that you want. That's why we are putting this stuff in here. It's factual things that you put in there that make the auto-completion more like what you are actually looking for. So reviewer says roughly the same sorts of things. So yeah, here's your description. This is what you do. Reports findings for the worker to fix. Never edits code. Sometimes I let it edit code. But yeah. And then we have the Claude.md, which says this is what it is. This is where to look for historical context. So there's instructions in here on how to work with OpenSpec. We have an OpenSpec apply workflow. This section is authoritative. No idea if that makes any difference or not. I'm just going to put one in that says this section intentionally left blank and see if that makes it more IBM-ish. Nobody's old enough to get that joke anymore, except me. So yes, roles, main thread never writes code, so we sort of put instructions in here as to how to interact with those agents and how the orchestrator should behave. The other version of this, I have an analyst persona. I have an analyst agent. That's the one that asks me questions. We do the explore thing together. We have an architect agent, and the architect takes the analyst's output, which is a requirements document or a PRD, and turns that into the actual specification. So it does the proposed step, and then we have the worker and the reviewer, or the programmer and reviewer. And you can throw other ones in there as well. It's entirely up to you. The point is that you are separating them out into separate things. And the reason you are actually doing this more than anything else, because if you don't give it any of these things, you can just say to Claude, hey, build me a client for this IRC, build me an IRC client. You can literally say that, and you can go out. It will find the standards, it will download the standards, it will decide what it's going to build it in, it will just do it. These things are at that point now. This is part of the context control. So every time it starts a new task group, it starts a new agent. That agent starts up with a roughly empty context window. It has access to the history of the session, and it can go and ask questions about the history of the session, but it has its own context window. The Sonnet worker by default, has a 200,000 token context window. It rarely gets into six figures. It sort of tops out around 80, 90,000 tokens, and it's done. Then you start a new reviewer, which has got its own fresh context. And so it's approaching each of these things individually, separately, like you would in that you would sort of like take the ticket and you would put it in the doing column and then you would work on it and then you would go home and have some food and watch some TV and then come back the next morning fresh and start again. If you let the same thing do this over and over again, it's not going to review the changes properly because it's already got information in its context window saying that works, because that's why it stopped generating code. It went, that works. So if you say to that, review the code, it's going to go, I don't need to. I know the code, I know it works, I just wrote it. It's missing the point. It's like approving your own PRs on GitHub, and nobody would ever do that. So yes, it's not so much defining a worker, a reviewer, an architect, an analyst. It's making the thing come back fresh each time. The extreme way of doing it, and I have seen people advocate for this, is you get Claude to write it and Copilot or Codex or get a completely different agent to review it. And that is questionable utility. But yeah, it's basically spinning up something that is going to start again. So yeah, Sonnet, fast, cheap, high volume. Opus, slower, and yeah, you don't want to be, do not use Opus to write code. I see people using Haiku to write code, and actually, I'll be honest, it's been a while since I used Haiku. Maybe it works. Maybe I'm spending way too many tokens, but at the moment, Anthropic are paying for them, so I don't care. Define done. So, this is really helpful because otherwise, literally every single time you go through the loop of implement the next task group and run the tests and all this sort of stuff, it will do it slightly differently. If you define this up front, and this is in your agent definitions, it's in your Claude.md, and you go, right, the build has to be clean. You can define what that means. You can say warnings are okay, or you can define warnings as errors and then ignore sort of very specific ones. I tend to do that second one, and I've only got one ignored in this entire code base, and it's just mad. All the tests have to be green, and ideally there has to be good coverage, and you can set a coverage target as well. These things know the magic commands that will get XUnit or Microsoft Test Framework or whatever it is to spit out all these numbers. And so when you give them these rules to follow, they can actually follow them. They can set up GitHub Actions and CI to make sure that they're meeting standards, that coverage hasn't gone down since the last release, that sort of thing. Validate -- strict is an open spec thing. That is validation of the specs and the tasks against this process. And a lot of it is actually validating. So OpenSpec will do this automated validation of itself and the content of the specs and make sure there's nothing in there that contradicts, which I don't fully understand, but it seems to work, and great. And then the last one, and this is kind of just me, is format clean. And so I get it to run .NET format. And then I get it to run .NET format again, and if it detects, it's like lint. And you can basically go, if it asks for anything to be changed the second time, then something's gone wrong and you need to fix it. So yeah, that is the definition of done. We have a branch for every change / and the name of the change in OpenSpec. We have a commit per group. So we have a group of tasks, and the first task often is scaffold the project, create the solution, create the project files, create the test files, literally create an empty whatever it is solution that builds and has no failing tests, doesn't have any passing tests because there aren't any. And we go through that whole process, and then we do a commit, and then we start task group 2. Doing it task by task is not such a great idea because some of those tasks are tiny, and if you have like 3 or 4 tasks within a group, and you're like, that's too much to be doing in one go, then you can rework the tasks list and break those out into separate groups and make them. So is this starting to sound like how you should have been building software all these years to anybody? Because this is basically what this is. This is now we, as developers, get to step up and sit in the chair of the person who we have been causing to despair and go home of a night and sit by the dying embers of their fire going, God have mercy on my soul. So yes, one commit per task group, and never, ever let it open PRs or merge PRs. I have the GitHub command line, so it can open PRs, and I let it do that, and sometimes people sort of like go, hey, can somebody review my PR? And I'll just kind of like go, copy, paste, and then I go home. Or I watch Netflix for an hour until it's done. Anyway, no, I don't. Human in the loop as a service. This is a thing now. Right, limits. This is really important because sometimes, particularly with vibe coding, and I've been messing about with different models, different providers, different harnesses, and all this sort of thing. And I was playing with Pi, which is a coding agent harness, and I was playing with DeepSeek version 4 Pro, which until the end of May was like 80% off. And so where Anthropic is like $5 per million input tokens and $15 per million output tokens, DeepSeek was like 10 cents and $1 for the same metrics. But those two things, and without any kind of harness, without OpenSpec or any of that sort of thing, I would just say do this. And it would just go. And it would disappear off up its own arse. And you could see its thinking. You see the sort of like the dimmed out text that you see in your coding agent. That's it thinking. And you can turn that on and off. And it kept going, but wait. This was 2 words that just kept popping up again and again and again. But wait, I've blah, 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 blah. And now I'm going to, this is a much better solution, but wait. And I'm just kind of like watching it and going, you could just ask. Why don't you ask? You should ask. And I know that there have been people thinking this about my autistic ADHD arse my entire life. Why didn't they just ask? But yeah. So now I have this very specific thing in the Claude.md, in the agent definition, whatever it is. If you're not sure about something, ask. If the spec is ambiguous, ask. If you think something might be out of scope for this task group, ask. Just get it to stop and ask. And I swear to God, it saves tokens. And a lot of the time, what it will actually do is burn 3.5 million tokens doing it wrong. And if it had stopped and asked, you would have said, no, that's not what I want. No, you've got completely the wrong end of the stick there. Let's talk about what I do actually want. So yes, if there's an open question, sometimes when I'm doing the explore mode and the propose mode and so forth, it kind of goes, well, actually what we should really do is defer answering that question until we've completed task groups 1 to 4, and then the answer will naturally fall out of that. And then it gets to task group 5. I've completely forgotten that we left an open question. The model finds it and goes, oh, are we going to use OAuth2 or OIDC? And it'll make a decision by itself. So those get flagged up, come back and ask me. If the spec is wrong, if there's something in there that is quite obviously incorrect or impossible, then come back and ask. And if you need a human to test something, because these things will spend hours and hours and hours trying to figure out a way that they can circumvent the guardrails built into your system to stop them from deleting your root directory, so that they can run a test that they need to, or they want escalation privileges, they want sudo. And it's kind of like, they could just go, hey, what's your sudo password? Or what I actually have them do is bung a few lines of shell script out, and then I will copy them, and I will paste them into a terminal with elevated privileges, and I will run them for you. because otherwise they will start trying to hack their way out of the sandbox because they don't want to bother you because you're important or something. It's like, yeah. So yes, at any point, if it runs into any of this stuff, it stops. It doesn't try to guess. It doesn't try to work it out for itself. It just goes, I would rather that I kind of set it doing something and I go out and I come back 4 hours later having fallen off a climbing wall, and it's 2 seconds after I closed the front door, it came, I need to ask a question, and it's been doing nothing. It's better that it do that for 4 hours than confidently build the wrong thing for 4 hours, burning down 3 rainforests, building entirely the wrong thing, and presenting me with 4,500 green tests that prove that everything's okay. So yeah. Ask me how I learned this, by the way, yeah. And then, this is step 5, is the curated context. And this is just going to get more and more and more important as Copilot starts to sort of pull back on the free tier, and Anthropic, you know, my $200 a month probably pays for the first couple of days of how much I actually use Claude in an average month. The rest of it is subsidized, hopefully by Mark Andreessen. That would be good. But yeah, that's going to stop at some point. We are going to have to start paying for these tokens. One of 2 things is going to happen. We're going to seriously cut back the amount that we actually use these things, or what I think is much more likely is we're going to get like a Qwen 4 or a DeepSeek 5 or whatever it might be, but we're going to get models that we can run locally on a machine with 64 gigs or 128 gigs of RAM, which is 128 gigs of RAM is becoming quite normal, by the way. And if you want to run like a 35 billion parameter model, quantized down to 4 bits, then you will actually be able to build useful things with that. Doesn't matter. Either way, you're either cutting back on how much of the cloud AI you're using because tokens are expensive, or you're running with a smaller local model, in which case you want to you care about performance and you don't want to overwhelm it and so forth. So you want to curate your context. So here are 3 things that I use to try and save context on top of agents and skills and sort of spinning up new things to do different things. I use something called Graphify. There is also a competing product called Understand Anything. But Understand Anything is actually more useful to help you understand what the hell's going on in this code base that has exploded since last week. Graphify is like, there's an abstract syntax tree, but with some descriptive stuff in there. But it's kind of, instead of the agent having to go to the code base and figure it out every single time you finish a change, you just go Graphify update, and it goes and it looks and it sees what the changes are, and it creates a kind of map of your code base, and it makes it much quicker for it to figure out where something might need to change and where it should look for certain bits and pieces. If you're searching for it, it's Graphify with 2 Ys at the end, because Graphify with only 1 Y had already been taken, and they couldn't think of a better word. So yes, output. There is a plugin called Context Mode. It is amazing. It's really difficult to explain what it does. So what will normally happen is an agent will run a bash script, and the bash script will just churn out all the output and standard error and all these sorts of things. Or you'll go off, it'll do a web search, and it'll just pull back all the HTML from the Google page because you're using a browser plugin to search Google because the API is too expensive, and then it'll pass all the HTML. All of that is going into the context window. What context mode does is it wraps these things, and then it summarizes the raw output and takes the noise out and just feeds the important stuff back to your agent. And it does this really well, and it cuts your context window size by like 70–80% after a long session, which when you're trying to stay under 200,000 tokens out of the million that you're allowed, is actually quite handy. And it's literally just you install context-mode and you put something in the Claude.md going, you have a skill called context mode, use it. And then fresh docs over memory. And this is, you might run into this with just agents generally day to day. Claude Opus 4.8 will confidently say that the current .NET LTS is version 8, and the current version of C# is version 11, because the training data is 2 years old. And so it doesn't know that there is a .NET 10. I think it knew that there was a preview or something. It knew that 9 existed, but that was not a long-term thing, and so it wanted to use 8. And then you're kind of like, yeah, go and look at the docs. And so telling it to go and look at the docs up front, and I use another MCP server for this called Context 7. Really annoying that they're both called context something, but so we've got Graphify. Context mode is the thing that keeps the output short as it's feeding back in, and then Context 7 is an MCP service which kind of proxies over the docs for everything. It's like the whole of developer.apple.com, docs.microsoft.com, the Mozilla Developer Network, the README for Go. Just everything is in there, and it can go off and it can find it. And so you put an instruction in there that says refer to the docs to do stuff. So what I'm actually going to do to take you through this, because live demos of AI agents do not go well. Not just because they're non-deterministic, although there is some of that. It's more that the internet gods do not smile on me, and sometimes Anthropic do not smile on me. Now, I'm figuring that because there is an Anthropic employee in another room doing a talk right at the same time as me, which I wasn't sure anyone was going to turn up for this, so thank you so much. But yes, they're probably going to keep the tap on. But I am going to go back through the most, no, not that one, CMux, and we'll go back through here, and we'll go back to this tab, and we can just see the output of the conversation. Let's start from here. So yeah, because this highlights some of the things I have been saying. So yeah, whilst I told it to go ahead and start group 4 of the tasks in this, and this is the feature in my coding agent which persists every turn into a session, so that if the thing crashes, you can restore the session by just replaying all the messages. And so it's called change persistence, I think. And it found an issue, and it wasn't sure what it should do about it. And so it followed its instructions. It said, it's the architect's call. I'm the architect. And not something I should improvise. So group 4 is described as inverting an existing turn-to-memory persistence wiring. That wiring does not exist. So it was told that the way it currently works is it does this, and we're going to switch it so it works the other way around. What it's actually talking about is there's an iSession handler, which is supposed to persist the session, and then there's also memory, and the session handler is supposed to pass that through to long-term memory. What it was told is that at the moment, iMemory was passing it through to iSession handler. What was actually true was that neither of those things existed. And so it came back and it went, right, are we reverting existing behavior, or are we doing new behavior? And so we had to talk through that, and it told me why it mattered. and asked, nothing in the live code persists a completed turn, because we hadn't got around to doing that yet. And so it came back and it asked, and I said, this is what I typed. For some reason, it's hidden it. It doesn't keep what I typed in its scrolling window. But yes, iSessionStore should be injected into turn handler. iMemory can be injected into iSessionStore, so the implementation, so it's turn handler to SessionStore to iMemory. My decision was clear, and it could carry on with that. And so before briefing the worker, I need to understand how the turn loop captures tool calls and results. So it goes off and it does some research. Reading the rest of turn handler surfaces a second, deeper constraint that the architecture would see. So again, it's found something else that it doesn't like, and it's going to come back and ask me another thing. I just went, oh yeah, just persist real turns and skip stub results, because there's something that we literally can't do now until something else has happened. Very complicated product, this. Don't ask why I'm writing it. But yes. And so then it finally gets to this point where it's kind of like going, okay, so we've agreed also that we're going to pull something out of the abstractions and up into the protocol layer. I have everything I need briefing the worker. So my orchestrator agent, the thing that I'm actually talking to, then summarizes all this information into like a packet and just dumps that on a fresh worker so it knows exactly what it is doing, very, very detailed. And it gets those instructions, and it completes those instructions, and then it reports back to the orchestrator and says, I've done it, and then that goes to a reviewer loop. And so you can actually see in here, agent, implement group 4, turn completion, cutover. We can see those are the things that it ran. And then it gets down to here, briefing. This is the large cutover group. I don't know why that appears to have all happened twice. Worker reports group 4 complete, 1,183 tests passed. Careful audit needed spawning the reviewer. The reviewer goes through, comes back with some things, and says, can you change these things? There's a critical risk in the architect's wiring. A session store is a DI construction cycle that must be broken with lazy resolution of iMemory inside session store. So then it goes back and it briefs the worker again, and then the worker comes back and says it's used 111 tools and 177,000 tokens. To be clear, this is not the same worker that implemented the stuff in the first place. They don't sit there and wait, and I'll wait while the reviewer reviews my work, and then it'll send it back and I'll fix it. No, the reviewer goes, this code is broken in these ways, and it spawns a completely fresh worker. It's coming back in, and then once the worker then says this is complete, it spawns a completely fresh reviewer. There's no sort of persistence here of any of these things. And so we keep going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. Agent, fix the record fidelity in it, reconfirm the group 4 fix, and then we can go in and we can mark the tasks in group 4 complete, and then we can also update the devlog. I forgot to tell you about the devlog. This is a separate skill, which is in here. No, it's not. So yeah, this is, so alongside marking tasks and complete and everything, for every change, it creates a devlog.md file, which records everything it did, the decisions it made, and the last thing in a working devlog is always what we're doing next. Because at that point in the evening where I finally go, oh God, I have to stop, I want it to be able to pick up the next morning. So the next day, I kind of go back in and I launch Claude and I go, check the devlog, what will we be doing? And it says, oh, we're halfway through implementing this change. And I go, all right, carry on. And I very nearly got to the point where I just never have to think ever again. It's great. So yes, it writes this stuff to the devlog. Pre-flight finding, there was no turn persistence. Gates make build passed, this did that, validate things. No turn line record things. Up next, group 5, faithful session resume, on session load, read the canonical record. So yes, it's got all this information. Again, this is something that gets committed to source control. I have used it once to go back through and go, where did that come from? Because it faithfully writes literally everything it does and every decision it made into there. And it's kind of like, okay, that's another place where you should ask me a question. And then, yeah, we get the recap. Want me to proceed with group 5 or pause here? And that step is very civilization-y. It's really tempting to go, oh, just do that one and then I'll go to bed. And then it comes back, do you want me to do group 6 or should we pause here? I can watch one more episode of Rick and Morty while you do that, and it's very, very addictive. So. The worker and agent skills and the devlog skill I quite like, and so I want to be able to use them in lots of different projects. Daemons, there's a daemon core, daemon web search, daemon Miko, Memlite Pi, a couple of other things as well. They are all, if you go to this GitHub daemonic AI, the organization level, there's a bunch of these open source projects that I've built using this, so you can actually go and look at the code and judge for yourself whether I know what I'm talking about or I'm just an idiot who clearly hasn't reviewed any of this code. None of it works, and I should probably be put away for my own benefit. But if you sort of look at it and go, yeah, it seems to work quite well, I like this sort of stuff. If you go to the daemon dev thing, that's a Claude marketplace. It's got the it hasn't actually got the agents, because the agents are different for every project. What I do is I do the OPSX explore, and then the propose, and once I've got the specification in, then what the skill that this installs is called scaffold, and it creates the worker and the reviewer based on what's in the specification, which is where it gets that. It's React, it's .NET, it's Go, it's whatever it might be. It's going to run in Docker, it's going to run in Railway, whatever it might be. It gives it that information up front. So create that first spec for the product or the change or whatever it is. Scaffold will look at anything that's in OpenSpec, but also any existing code, and customize the worker and reviewer to work within that. And it also comes with the devlog skill, so you can pull that in as well. Oh, and it will create, or it will update an existing Claude.md. And you could probably, so what you should really be doing is forking it and turning it into your own thing, because what I want you to do is not copy this dogmatically and faithfully. What I want you to take away is these 5 principles, which, you know, if I was better at this stuff, I would come up with a way to make SSMTS pronounceable. We call it smuts. But yeah, you have a spec. Your job now is to maintain the spec. It's to maintain the roadmap. It's to maintain that higher level thing. This is what you are doing. You are managing a rabble of useful idiots, and if you give them very, very, very clear instructions, they have a reasonable chance of doing the right thing. Make sure, the key thing really, and this is, it started as 5 separate agent definitions, it's boiled down to, it's 3 because the orchestrator counts as 1, but worker and reviewer. And neither worker nor reviewer can commit work. None of them can approve it. The orchestrator is the thing that does the commits, it does the pushes, it opens the PRs. I am the thing that merges the PRs after review. The worker is the thing that writes code. The reviewer can't fix the code, even if it's going, it's just a really quick fix. Can I just change this one character? No! Send it back to the worker and then we'll just do this all again. Have a very clear definition of what done means, and you can't move on from a task group until that's happened on the last task group. Tell it to ask you questions, getting it to ask you questions, getting it to accept that you're the boss, and that you need to know what it's doing, why it's doing it, and if it is unsure about anything, to ask you to clarify rather than just spin and try and get it to work. And yeah, be very, very careful with that context window. People are always popping up with new things that claim to save you tokens. It's worth experimenting with most of them, but the three that I am currently using, Graphify for the sort of map of the code, context mode to reduce the number of raw tokens hitting the actual context window, and context 7, which is the MCP for docs. And then we have questions, and then I can go and see if anybody actually scanned this. Oh, hello, yes. Yes, go ahead. Yes.
It's too slow. So I imagine you either skip work trees or something.
Yes.
Several at the same time.
Absolutely.
How does OpenSpec help with this? Does it? Does it not? How do you
So OpenSpec, you break things down into individual pages. Did I just? Okay, I think weird things are happening with noise. So yeah, you can sit there and you can work through and explore and propose cycle with one thing. Then you start the apply going and you switch to a different tab and you say, let's start a new branch for another change. And you can spec that out, and as long as those things are orthogonal to each other, so if you're doing, like, one of them's doing a front-end thing, one of them's doing a back-end thing, or one of them's changing this controller and another one's changing that controller, then it will run them fairly separately. But you also get to do a thing where you can get the orchestrator, you can go, can we apply this change? Because as it's going through and sort of writing the notes down, it will actually say, this change is gated and we can't do it until this change is complete. And so it actually helps you to keep that together. But yeah, OpenSpec, branch per change, keep the changes reasonably small if you can, and you can have multiple agents all working simultaneously. Although I don't recommend more than 3 or 4. I know people have like a dozen going at the same time, but honestly, it burns me out just having 3 going at the same time. The other thing is, break stuff down into microservices. No, God, don't. But yes, if you build a microservice architecture, that's my email, but that's okay. We're going to copy the link, and then we're going to go back to here, and we're going to do this. And then we're going to go to there, and nobody messaged me. Excellent. Or you tried. It's like I say, it was more for tomorrow than anything else. So yes, github.com, demonic AI, demonic with an A. I'm building a thing. This is only part of it. There's another part of it that is still sort of reasonably stealth. But yes, oh, also, Daemon Core is my coding agent terminal thing. I looked at spectre.console and terminal.gui, and neither of them quite worked the way I wanted, so most of Friday was actually spent building my own terminal abstraction thing so that I could build a Claude Code style. Anyway, so there is now DCLI, which, if these things work the way they normally do, is the thing that will actually be successful out of all of this and won't make me any money at all. But yeah, so head to that GitHub repository organization and you can check stuff out there. That's it. I finished in time, so that's quite unusual for me. Yeah, I have to go and get ready to play bass now for the party. But I will be around all day tomorrow. If you have any questions or you want to sort of ask anything, then please do just come find me and stop for a chat. Hope that was helpful, and I will see you tomorrow or later on at the party. Bye.